My name is Eleanor. What I'm about to tell you isn't easy to admit. It's a story that's left me wrestling with desire duty and the razor-thin line between right and wrong. The air's thick with guilt, heavy as the ocean breeze outside my window, and every word feels like a confession I'm not sure I'm ready to make. My husband, Henry, left early that morning for a weekend business trip to Chicago. We live in a small house on the Maine coast, where big windows let in sunlight and the endless rhythm of waves crashing against the shore. Henry loves his work, and I've always backed him, even if his trips leave the house feeling hollow like a shell washed up on the beach. That morning, I decided to fill the quiet with chores to freshen the place up. I put on my favorite jazz playlist, the notes drifting soft and lazy from the speakers blending with the salty breeze that curled through the open windows. I wore a simple white t-shirt and denim shorts easy to move in. As I dusted the tall bookshelves where Henry keeps his prized trinkets, a prickle ran down my spine like someone was watching me. I turned, and there was Jack Henry's old college friend who'd been staying with us leaning against the doorway. Jack had just rolled out of bed, his hair a mess, eyes still heavy with sleep. "Morning, Eleanor," I said, flashing a smile, keeping my voice light. "Morning," he replied, but his gaze lingered sharp and searching longer than it should have. He stepped into the living room and sank onto the couch watching me. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my work, but his presence was like a weight pulling at the edges of my calm. We made small talk, his internship plans, projects he was working on. But as I reached to adjust a picture frame on the top shelf, I didn't realize I was unsteady on the small step stool. It wobbled and I lost my balance. "Eleanor," Jack shouted, lunging forward. His arms wrapped around my waist just before I hit the floor. In the stillness of that room, his grip was firm, steady, like an anchor in a storm. We froze, locked in place for a few seconds. My breath caught in my chest as our eyes met closer than they'd ever been close enough to feel the heat of him. His hold was strong, but gentle, like he was afraid I'd startle. My heart pounded a wild drumbeat I couldn't silence as I felt his warm breath against my skin. I forced a laugh to break the tension. "Good thing you were here. That could have been bad," I said softly. Jack didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on me, dark and unreadable, like they were trying to pull something out of me. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice low. "Good thing." I stepped out of his arms, smoothing my shirt, trying to shake the heat rising in my face. He stood there, still watching. I turned to him, forcing a normal tone. "Got any plans for the weekend?" He shrugged, a faint smile flickering. "Not really. Probably just hang out here, relax." I nodded and gestured to the couch, sitting down to steady myself after the near fall. Jack sat too, and suddenly the space between us felt too small, like the air itself was pressing us closer. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, alive, charged with something unspoken. The sound of waves rolled in from outside sunlight, spilling through the windows, casting golden patterns across his face. I glanced at him and saw that steady gaze again, but softer now, raw and honest, in a way that made my chest ache. "I've always liked mornings like this," I said, breaking the quiet. "Peaceful, no rush." Jack nodded, his voice softer too. "Me too, especially when there's someone to share it with." His words stopped me cold. They weren't casual. They carried a weight like a secret he'd been holding too long. My heart raced. "Eleanor," he whispered, his eyes locked on mine. "Sometimes I feel like we get each other, without saying a word." Heat crept up my face. I shouldn't feel this way, but the way he looked at me blurred everything. Without thinking, I reached out my hand, brushing his arm. The touch was like a spark freezing the air between us. Our breaths mingled close enough to taste the danger. "Jack?" I murmured, unsure, but I couldn't look away. He didn't speak. Instead, he placed his hand over mine, gentle but firm, like he was anchoring us both. In that moment, I knew we were teetering on the edge of something bigger, something we couldn't take back. Before I could think, he leaned closer, and I didn't pull away. Under the morning light, his breath warm against my cheek, the world outside faded. His lips brushed mine, soft but electric, and a shiver tore through me like lightning. The kiss wasn't rushed. It was deliberate, like we both knew we were crossing a line we couldn't uncross. My heart pounded, a wild thing trapped in my chest. I knew this was wrong. I knew I should stop. But Jack's warmth, his touch, was a fire I couldn't resist. His hand grazed my cheek, pulling me closer like he was afraid I'd vanish. I felt his heart beat fast and strong, matching mine. My fingers touched his shoulder, feeling the taut strength beneath his shirt, his breath hitching as he whispered my name. "Eleanor." His voice was a low growl, raw and pleading, shaking me to my core. I leaned into him, his arms wrapping around me, strong yet tender, like he could shield me from the world we were betraying. His breath was warm against my ear, his lips tracing a slow path along my temple down to my cheek, where tiny beads of sweat betrayed my inner chaos. My body trembled, not from fear, but from a desire so real, so forbidden, it burned like a fever I couldn't shake. His fingers threaded through my hair, gentle but possessive, pulling me into a moment that felt like it could swallow us whole. "Eleanor," he whispered again, his voice thick with want, begging me not to turn away. I didn't know what choice I made in that moment. It was like I was caught in a current, swept away by a river I couldn't fight. My heart urged me to give in despite the consequences. I closed my eyes, feeling his breath near my neck, his steady heartbeat, a rhythm that made everything feel like a dream. But a small voice in my mind whispered, "You've crossed the line." Still, I couldn't stop. Jack pulled me closer, his warmth enveloping me like a blanket against the cold reality waiting outside. "I never thought this could happen," he murmured, his eyes shining with uncertainty and joy that I hadn't pushed him away. "But I don't want to lose you or this." His words pierced me sharp as a blade. I knew I should step back, but my hand stayed locked in his. Our breaths synced fast but strangely calm. The waves outside kept their endless song, making our moment feel separate from the world. I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling safe and terrified all at once. Reality faded like a curtain drawn shut. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or awake. The line between us had blurred into a thin haze. Then a sound shattered the stillness. The front door creaked open, followed by a familiar voice echoing through the house. "Eleanor." "I'm home." I froze like waking from a fevered dream. Jack and I pulled apart, snapped back to reality like a rubber band. My heart stopped for a split second. Jack let go, his eyes wide with panic, but still holding something deeper, something we didn't dare name. My pulse thundered, shaking my whole body. The air seemed to vanish as Henry stepped in his face, bright with a cheerful smile, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "Eleanor." His voice was warm, easy like always when he came back from a trip. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "In here," I called, stepping out of the living room, forcing a smile though my hands still trembled. Henry walked over, wrapping me in a tight hug, kissing my forehead. "Missed you," he said, completely unaware of the tension choking the room. I glanced at Jack. He stood a few feet away, hands shoved in his pockets like he was trying to keep them from shaking. Our eyes met for a moment, long enough to feel the chaos in his heart, guilt mixed with a longing that wouldn't quit. "Jack, that you," Henry called, spotting him. "Come say hi." Jack took a deep breath, composing himself, and stepped forward with a forced smile. "Hey man, how was the trip?" Henry grinned, clapping Jack on the shoulder. "Went great. Everything fell into place. Even brought back some gifts for you both." The word gifts hit me like a stone. It reminded me I was caught between two worlds, one of Henry's steady love and another tangled in forbidden feelings with Jack. Henry turned to me beaming as he recounted his meetings and funny stories from the trip. His words washed over me, barely sinking in. My mind was stuck on that moment before, when I'd felt truly seen, desired in a way I hadn't thought possible again. Jack stood quietly behind Henry, his eyes still on me, like he was trying to say something without words. I looked away, afraid Henry would notice the crack in my facade. "I'll make us some coffee," I said, forcing a smile. "You must be tired." Henry nodded, heading to the kitchen, oblivious to the heavy silence. The second the kitchen door swung shut, I turned to Jack. "We have to stop," I whispered, my voice trembling. Jack stepped closer, his eyes raw with pain. "I know," he said, swallowing hard like he was fighting to find words for something he didn't fully understand. "But this feeling—" "Jack, we can't," I said, clenching my fists, holding on to the last shred of resolve I had. "This family, Henry, it's everything." He went quiet, his eyes heavy with sorrow. He nodded, but I knew we both understood what happened between us wasn't something we could easily forget. Henry came back with 2 mugs of coffee, his smile as bright as ever. "You two look serious." "Nothing went down while I was gone, right?" I forced a laugh, thin and brittle. "No, nothing. Just small talk," I said, taking a mug from him. Jack managed a smile too, but his eyes were shadowed with unease and regret. He turned and walked to the big window overlooking the ocean, like he was trying to escape the weight of the room. I sat next to Henry, but the familiar comfort was gone, cracked by what I'd done. His hand in mine didn't calm the storm inside me. In the days that followed, a heavy silence settled over the house. I tried to keep things normal, cleaning, cooking dinner with Henry, asking about his work like always. But in every quiet moment I felt Jack's eyes on me. He avoided looking at me when Henry was around, but when we crossed paths in the kitchen, the hallway, or on the porch, the unspoken tension hung between us like a live wire. One afternoon, when Henry was out watching a game with friends, I stepped into the backyard to water the rose bushes. The late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, but my mind was heavy with thoughts I couldn't shake. I heard soft footsteps behind me and knew it was Jack. My heart tightened, but I didn't turn around. "Just came out for some air," he said, his voice low, hesitant. I nodded, focusing on the hose, my hands trembling as water sprayed unevenly. He stepped closer, close enough for me to hear his steady breathing in the cool sea breeze. "You're avoiding me, aren't you?" he asked, his voice soft but urgent. I stayed silent, afraid that speaking would break me. "I know what happened was hard," he said, his voice cracking. "But I can't pretend it didn't happen. I can't stop thinking about you." I turned to face him, and in his eyes I saw every emotion I was trying to bury: confusion, desire, guilt. "Jack, we have to move past this," I said, keeping my voice steady. His gaze wavered, then hardened with pain. "But how it keeps playing in my head, every look, every moment." I gripped the hose until my knuckles whitened. "I feel it too," I admitted. "Every morning, every night, I see it like it was yesterday. But we have to stop. This family is everything Henry and I built." My eyes stung as tears threatened. "Jack, if you care about this family, about Henry, we have to let this go." He went still like he was wrestling with himself. Finally, he nodded his shoulders, trembling slightly, like he'd lost something vital. He turned and walked back inside, leaving me alone in the fading light, empty and aching in every corner of my soul. I stood there as the sun sank below the horizon, the waves a relentless reminder of time's patience. But inside me, everything churned like a storm. I knew the feeling hadn't faded. Every glance, every memory of Jack was carved into my mind. But I also knew that if I didn't act, if I kept living in this limbo, everything would collapse. That night, as Henry slept, I sat on the couch staring out at the dark ocean. The vastness stretched before me, but my thoughts were tangled, restless. The next morning, I made up my mind to end the suffocating tension for good. I walked into the kitchen where Jack was sitting, his eyes snapping to me like he knew this was coming. I sat across from him, hands clasped to keep them steady. "Jack." I began, my voice soft but firm. "We can't keep doing this." He nodded slowly, his eyes heavy with sorrow. "I know, but how do we pretend it never happened?" I looked at him, the ache in my chest mixing with resolve. "We can't change what happened, but we can choose how to move forward. You've got a future ahead of you. And I have a responsibility to this family." Jack bowed his head, his shoulders heavy. "I've never felt like this before," he said. "But I'll try." I reached out, touching his hand one last time, a silent goodbye. "I know you can, and I will too." We sat in silence, but this time it was a silence of acceptance. I knew what we'd felt wasn't a mistake. It was part of the messy human emotions we can't always control. But choosing to let go didn't diminish it. It was proof of the respect we had for each other and for this family. A week later, Jack struck by a chord of desire. I didn't pull away. Henry's friend Jack had received an offer for a dream internship with a big firm in Boston, a chance he'd been hoping for. At dinner, when he shared the news, Henry was thrilled, hugging him, beaming with pride. I smiled, feeling both relief and a quiet sadness. The day Jack left, I stood at the door and hugged him tightly. "Take care of yourself, Jack," I whispered. "You too, Eleanor," he said, his eyes soft but resolute. He walked away, carrying his dreams and our memories. I watched his car disappear down the coastal road, feeling lighter but hollow, like I'd closed a chapter of my life. Our story didn't have a neat, happy ending, but sometimes walking away is the only way to hold on to what's beautiful. I stepped back into the warm house, hearing Henry call me from the living room, his familiar, comforting voice pulling me back. I walked in and smiled at him. Life moved on, and I chose to protect the peace I knew I had to keep inside me.